Well, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to this Wednesday offering of the Tell It Slant Poetry Festival, brought to you by the Emily Dickinson Museum. My name is Anna Plummer, Program Coordinator here at the museum, and I hope you have been enjoying the virtual offerings of the festival so far. Today, we are pleased to bring you poetry, spirituality, and new forms of attention. But before I introduce tonight's poet, I want to say a quick few words about Zoom. So in this format, the best way for you to engage with us and with each other is through the chat feature. And you can begin now, if you like, by chiming in to tell us where you are tuning in from. And the chat is a great place to connect with your fellow attendees. And you will also be invited to share about your own writing and responses to the prompts in the chat today. However, if you have a question for today's poet, I'm going to ask that you type it into the QA feature, which you can also find in your Zoom toolbar. And this will help us attend to questions separately from all your creative community chatter that we hope to see. Tonight's program features auto-generated captions, which you can toggle on or off from the toolbar. And now let's turn to today's workshop. Allow me to introduce the poet you'll be hearing from. So Nadia Colburn is the author of I Say the Sky and the High Shelf. She holds a PhD in English from Columbia University, is a yoga teacher, serious student of Thich Nhat Hanh, and a founder of Align Your Story Writing School, which brings traditional literary and creative writing studies together with mindfulness, embodied practices, and social and environmental engagement. And you can find her at nadiacolburn.com, where she offers meditations and free resources for readers, which we will also be linking for you in the chat soon. And I just want to send, on behalf of the museum, Rachel Zucker, our fondest wishes, who had originally planned to be present today, but needs to step down to care for her family. Nadia is also joined today by Katie Welsh, who is assisting behind the scenes. Thank you, Katie. But let's get to it. So thank you, and over to you, Nadia.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Katie. And thank you, everyone who's here. I'm really glad to be here with you. I am here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I just want to also just honor Rachel and have a moment of recognition for her and her family. I actually went to high school with Rachel, so I've known her a really long time, and our lives have kind of crossed and intersected in various ways. We were in different grades, but I'm just holding her and her family in my heart as they're going through some medical challenges. So I put together a PDF with lots of resources, and that has resources as well about Rachel's work, and we'll look at some of her poems and some of the poems we're going to be looking at, and maybe we can put that in the chat so people can see that. And I'm also going to be sharing my screen so you'll be able to see that, see the poems that we look at in the screen share. But a little bit just about me and about Dickinson and about spirituality, forms of attention. I think that Dickinson is a poetic mother for so many of us, maybe for all American poets and then poets around the world. And she opens up new possibilities and is always asking probing questions and is always original. She's always attending to form and breaking form at the same time, right? And she's often challenging. And the very ways in which her poetry is difficult, challenging, I think invigorates us as readers and as writers. So a little bit just about her background, and maybe what I'll do is I'll start with a poem, and then I'll lead us all in a short meditation. But I'm just going to read a poem to you first. This is perhaps one of Dickens's most famous poems about spirituality, but also so characteristic of her work. And maybe because it is a little bit challenging to just follow along with poetry, I'm going to share my screen, and you can look at it with me. So here's the poem. Let's see if this works. Okay. And I'm going to use my singing bowl. Some keep the Sabbath going to church. Some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying at home with a bobolink for a chorister and an orchard for a dome. Some keep the Sabbath in surplice. I just wear my wings, and instead of tolling the bell for church, our little sexton sings. God preaches, a noted clergyman, and the sermon is never long. So instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along. So this is such a beautiful, inspiring poem. It's also one of her maybe more accessible poems. And you might want to put in the chat, what is this poem saying? Just so we look at it together. We're kind of, so Dickinson, of course, just a little bit, well, let's answer my own question. What is church is where you find it? Well, is Dickinson going to church in this poem? Dickinson's staying at home. Well, and that is how she keeps Sabbath. And her sacred place is the natural world. The chorister is the bird. The orchard is the dome, right? And heaven is not some place that we will get to after we die, but rather right here and right now, she is going all along to this place that is heaven. So yes, she's keeping Sabbath almost continuously, and God is easily found in nature. So the poem becomes a sacred place itself to pay attention to what is around us, and that becomes almost a religious act, right? And it's something that we participate in. So a little bit of context about, I'm going to stop my share screen now. A little bit of context about Dickinson and her time. So of course, she lived through the revival period of mid-19th century New England, when people were very enthusiastic about going to church and proclaiming their faith. And there was a real kind of social expectation that people would do this. And if they didn't, they were in some ways ostracized. So all of the other members of Dickinson's family eventually proclaimed their faith in this new revivalism, and Dickinson did not, interestingly. And that was really brave of her. She was standing against her time. Instead, she turned to her poetry as that place to explore what faith means to her, and to have a space where she could have both reason and faith, the illogical and the logical, the personal and the communal, but not give away her own sense of agency to a hierarchical structure. And I think that's really what she does within her poems, and gives poets that permission to find in poetry that space where we come with curiosity, with attention, with a desire for the sacred, with a desire for that communion, but without following someone else's simple answers or simple rules. And I know that that's certainly what I find when I go to a poem, when I go to other people's poems or my own writing practice. It's that place to find connection and meaning without that rigid dogma. So what I'd love to do is invite you in a little bit of meditation now, because to have that kind of sense of connection without the dogma, we need to have a different compass. The compass isn't, these are the words that someone else gives us and says, these are the rules we have to follow, but rather turning our attention to what's around us and what's in us and seeing where that alignment is, where the meanings are. And to do that, we need to be able to listen. So let's have that moment to listen together, to be present, to come into our own awareness. And if you're new to meditating, just follow along with me. And if you're experienced, come to it as a first timer again. I invite you to take a nice long deep breath. You can put your hand on your heart if you want. And allow yourself to bring your attention to your breath. And notice your body here. Being present with yourself, opening the five senses, without putting a story around it. Let's do a short writing together. My invitation to you now is to write a short poem on where you go for that sacred connection, whether you call it Sabbath or practice or praying, but what place, grounded in a specific place. It could be an actual place, it could be an internal place, it could be an imagined place, but where do you go for that place of sacred connection? And take a few moments here for your own writing. And as you're writing, try to use as many details as possible. Really use the senses of the body. We'll take just one more minute here. And maybe just a phrase, maybe just an image, to see what arises. So again, maybe you just had a little bit, but I love what you're posting. I see music, weeds, my thoughts. These are all, some of you have written a lot. This is amazing. Whole poems have come to people. If nothing came to you, don't worry. That's totally fine. To be honest, sometimes I can't write with prompts, but I like to give myself that opportunity. Sometimes there's a little seed and maybe later the poem will germinate in you. But it's really interesting to think about, like, if your place of connection is music, how do you put music? How do you describe music in language? So there's that translation. How do you describe weeds in language? Dickinson's poems remind us to go and be specific, to look, to listen. And sometimes what she has us describe is the physical world. And sometimes someone said, I go to my thoughts. She has us describe that inner world, right? So how do you describe that inner world also? I'm going to just read a few of these. I love what you're posting. Thank you. Let's see. Saw some poems up here. I close my eyes and see the universe unfold. Here, there, here I come back, and as I get caught in my doldrums, fear, shame, guilt, it is clear for me to see the queer inhabitants of all, love, life, laughter, lucky, lucidity, lo, all come back to me. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I would love to see all of these later. It's really musical. Think about the music also. What's the music of the place that you want, even if where you're going isn't music, what's the music of the weeds? How do you describe weeds or thought with certain kind of rhythms, right? Anyway, these are all, I'm loving your comments. So I want to look at some more of Dickinson's poems, because that first poem we looked at was pretty straightforward, right? She goes out into nature and she sees the bobolinks, she sees the orchard, but often she'll take us into places where language has a harder time going. And that, I think, is one of her great gifts as a poet, that she takes us into those spaces that are hard to translate. So I'm going to share another poem with you. Let me just pull it up again. Maybe I'll just read a few poems so we kind of get a sense of where Dickinson is. Okay. I'm going to ring my bowl again. And if you want, you could even close your eyes and just listen. Or you can read along if you like. So this is getting a little bit more complex, this poem. The skies can't keep their secret. The skies can't keep their secret. They tell it to the hills. The hills just tell the orchards, and they the daffodils. A bird by chance that goes that way, soft overhears the whole. If I should bribe the little bird, who knows, but she would tell. Notice that slant rhyme. I think I won't, however. It's finer not to know. If summer were an axiom, what sorcery had snow? So keep your secret, father. I would not, if I could, know what the sapphire fellows do in your new-fashioned world. So this is a whole poem about telling, about language itself, about what's communicated and what isn't communicated. And we see that a little bit in the first poem, right? That she goes to a different place, right? At the old, than the traditional person for Sabbath. And here, what you have is secrets. The skies can't keep their secrets. So this is about telling and not telling. And what language do skies use? And what kind of secrets do skies have? It's so interesting, right? They tell it to the hills. What are they telling? The rain? The reflections? The blueness? There's so much ways in which we as readers are asked to be active, interpreting, trying to make sense of. And I know I come to poetry partly for that active engagement, that sense that we both understand the world and don't understand the world. There are things that can be communicated and things that aren't fully communicated. And that's exactly why we go to poetry. Because when we use words like God to speak of spiritual matters, right? What does that mean? It means something different to all of us. It's always a translation, an approximation. So here's this whole poem about not keeping secrets, but we don't know ultimately what the secret is, what it isn't. And at the end, she tells us, "So keep your secret, Father. I would not, if I could, know what the sapphire fellows do in your new-fashioned world." And really, you can have different interpretations of what this poem means to you. And I think that's really powerful. I just want to look at your chat and see what you're all saying. Not knowing is most intimate. The use of the... Okay, I'm going to keep going. I'm nobody. Who are you? This is another poem about what is and what isn't communicated. Maybe you know this poem. I'm nobody. Who are you? I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They'd advertise, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog, to tell one's name the livelong June to an admiring bog. And notice the rhyme, of course, but it's so interesting that this poet, and we all, of course, know Dickinson was not published in her lifetime, so she did not become a quote-unquote somebody, but is holding that space for the private, for communication that's outside of the everyday, and giving value to that. I'm just going to keep reading so you get a sense of these poems. I know that he exists. I know that he exists somewhere in silence. He has hid his rare life from our gross eyes. 'Tis an instant's play, 'tis a fond ambush, just to make bliss earn her own surprise. But should the play prove piercing earnest, should the glee glaze in death's stiff stare, would not the fun look too expensive? Would not the jest have crawled too far? So this is, again, a trickier poem, but I know that he exists. Well, who is the he? God, perhaps. Somewhere in silence. And so when I'm thinking about Dickinson, I'm always thinking about both what's said and what's coming out of silence, how she's managing that silence. And one way she manages silence is through her punctuation. I know that he exists somewhere, dash, in silence, dash. There's these gaps, these holes, these kind of spaces that are places that are holding space within her poem for something that isn't quite there. He has hid his rare life from our gross eyes. Right? So there's some rarity, right? Some refinement that our gross eyes, our heavy, our ordinary eyes don't quite see. 'Tis an instant's play, 'tis a fond ambush, just to make bliss earn her own surprise. And look at her capitalization. So that's also trying to show us to pay attention differently to these abstract ideas. In the first poem, we had the orchard and the bobolink. These are tangible things, but now Dickinson's drawing our attention to these intangible things like bliss. He, God, right? How do we give language to what is intangible, to what we can't see with our physical eyes or touch with our physical hands? Yeah, the poem is simultaneously a poem of faith and doubt. I think that's right. But should the play prove piercing earnest, this play of life, right? Should the glee glaze and death's stiff stare, this bliss that's life, what happens when we die? And these poems, most of my favorite Dickinson poems, were written in those years leading up to the Civil War and the years of the Civil War. Still the bloodiest war in American history. And so many young men from Amherst fought where Dickinson lived, fought in the war, and died in the war. So all around her is this horrible war tearing the country apart, right? Over something also horrible, the crazy idea and reality that people were being enslaved, right? And so these poems come out of a real spiritual questioning. She has a wonderful poem I don't have here, about how, no, I'm going to get it wrong, but she says, dare I own the body? Dare I own a soul? Possession, not optional. I'll get that poem for you later. But anyway, she's really questioning how to find meaning in this world that's so challenging. Would not the fun look too expensive? Would not the jest have crawled too far? Yes, I'm afraid to own I'm afraid to own a body is the poem. Thank you. I'm afraid to own a body. I'm afraid to own a soul. Profound, precarious property, possession, not optional. Double estate entailed at pleasure upon an unsuspecting heir, duke in a moment of deathlessness, and God for a frontier. Wow. So there's again that idea of God, that grappling, that her poems are a place of questioning, turning over, not having easy resting places. And so this is an interesting one, because usually in these poems, right, this is, I'm going to just go show you. This is a simpler poem, right? Hills, daffodils, whole, tell, no snow, could world. But when we get here to the rhyming, silence, eyes, there's more off rhyme. Ambush, surprise. Earnest, stare. Expensive, far. The off rhyme becomes even more off. There's something not quite aligning that Dickinson gets in her poems themselves. So I'm going to just keep moving through her work. Actually, I'm going to go to this next poem here, which is another famous one, that talking about that not quite aligning, about Dickinson's looking for the spiritual, but in a world where things don't always line up. giving language to the unsayable. So as she says here in this poem, there's a certain slant of light winter afternoons that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us. We can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it, any. 'Tis the seal, despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens. Shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. And so here, that internal difference where the meanings are, I think that is like an ars poetica for Dickinson. This is what one of the many things that she does so beautifully in her poetry. And here she's taking an image, the image of that slant of light on winter afternoons. So that's something that we see with our eyes, to describe a feeling, something that's intangible, that's interior world, that space of knowing, not knowing. And again, she's using this traditional form, but making it her own. And the dashes, the capitalizations, all of that gives us the sense of both kind of harmony and disharmony, both flow and disruption of flow. And again, there's that death, that distance. So I'm going to go back to this poem here, another famous one, but I think so much a poem about getting to that place where language itself falls off. For me, one of the legacies of Dickinson is that she expresses what cannot otherwise be expressed and gives us freedom and permission in our own poems to go into those spaces. I felt a funeral in my brain, and mourners to and fro kept treading, till it seemed that sense was breaking through. And when they all were seated, a service like a drum kept beating, till I thought my mind was going numb. And then I heard them lift a box and creak across my soul with those same boots of lead again. Then space began to toll, as all the heavens were a bell and being but an ear, and I and silence, some strange race wrecked, solitary, here. And then a plank in reason broke, and I dropped down, and hit a world at every plunge, and finished knowing then. And notice there, again, there's this, the second and fourth lines usually rhyme, down and then, something that like that off rhyme, to me, down and then is like really eerie sounding, or something about that off rhyme, just then, and finish knowing then. It's so, she captures, she enacts in her poems that place where we go beyond language, but she puts it into the poem itself. And like when she's, the drum kept beating, till I thought my mind was going numb, that harsh rhythm that she has, right? That's creating that sense of agency and urgency and worry, and then that sense of falling, a plank in reason broke. Yeah, I like wrecked, solitary, here. So I'm going to read you maybe one more poem by Dickinson and then give you another prompt and you can write. And then I'll talk a little bit more about my own work and other poets' work and how so many of us have been inspired by Dickinson. The The world is not conclusion. A species stands beyond, invisible as music, but positive as sound. It beckons and it baffles. Philosophy don't know. And through a riddle at the last, sagacity must go. To guess it puzzles scholars. To gain it, men have borne contempt of generations, and crucifixion shown. Faith slips and laughs and rallies, blushes if any see, plucks at a twig of evidence, and asks avain the way. Much gesture from the pulpit, strong hallelujahs roll. Narcotics cannot still the tooth that nibbles at the soul. So we could spend an hour and a half on really any of these poems. This is again, a lot going on here, but and so many different images. But I think the main point of this poem is in that first line, the world is not conclusion. And going back to the poem we just read, that and finish knowing then, Dickinson doesn't end her poems on wrapping it up. Her poems often open into a wider question. The poems can be that space, right, of holding not knowing, and that not knowing itself might be the sacred. So the world is not conclusion. And someone said that you're a philosophy professor, and that's yeah, so it sums it up so well. So I thought maybe we could do a little writing prompt with that as a prompt. The world is not conclusion. And I'm going to give you the prompt. I'll write it down, but then I'm going to lead you in a short meditation. So try to just drop the prompt from your mind and settle into your body. And I ring the singing bowl because in the traditions that I practice in, we often have a singing bowl, and I find it a really nice way to kind of clean the space and recenter. And so I ask you in this, well, actually, I'm not going to give you the prompt now. I think that's actually better. I'm going to lead you through a meditation so that you can really be present with your body, and then I will give you the prompt. And again, just see where it goes. Maybe just a phrase will come. Maybe just free write and say, I have nothing to say about this. Or maybe a whole poem will come. Just be curious. And I'm going to give you both a prompt and I'm going to give you a few words from the poem. If you want to kind of be more playful, try to incorporate these words into your poem, because that often allows us to make connections we wouldn't make otherwise, to use language that we wouldn't use otherwise, and again, be in that more kind of playful space of our own consciousness. I invite you to follow your breath down into your body. These poems by Dickinson are all both abstract, but also grounded in the body. So I invite you to bring your breath down into your belly. Be conscious of that feeling in your belly. If there's any part of your body that feels uncomfortable, bring your awareness and your breath to that part of your body that's calling out for your attention. Feel the seat supporting you. Bring your attention down through your legs into your toes. Down through your arms into your fingers. up through your face to the crown of your head. My prompt for you, my invitation to you, is to write a poem with the title, perhaps, or the first line, "The world is not conclusion." And write from a place of questioning. What's something that you do not know? What's a question that you have in your life now? And I'm going to give you a few words to incorporate if you want. Riddle, scholar, generations, laugh, tooth, and pluck. Anna, were you able to get that and put that in the chat? Thank you. See what wants to come out of your own body as you're writing. And try to get out of your analytical mind and work with the rhythms that come through you. We'll be here for about 5 minutes. Be playful. take in a moment and focus your attention back on your body and see if there is a deepening of the question or a turn to the question or an answer emerging from your body. Just see what happens. And we'll have another 2 minutes and then we'll come back together. I love what you've been putting in the chat. Thank you, Katie, for letting me know that my chat wasn't getting to everyone. um, and No, I'm gonna just read some. No answer, though I whittle the long tooth of generations, one posy shan't be plucked, however different, indifferent, a circle on a circle on a circle, to laugh is enough. What must the world need from me? Must I whittle myself into a useful tool that will impact generations to come? Should I be a scholar who grinds my teeth and plucks ideas from paper and argument, or to create a new philosophy? Or is it enough to make one person laugh? I love that. Thank you, Rebecca and Althea. I like the repetition, the circle on a circle on a circle, and they both ended with laugh. That's so interesting. There's so many things that are here. Thank you all. The rules and what I've come to know so often lead me off astray, my breath and body laugh each time I take the scholar's path. Like wisdom in a tooth contained, it must be plucked to see where generations' feet have walked. The riddle asks, where will I walk? I like those rhymes in there. So keep these poems, keep sharing them. I'm going to keep moving on, but I love them. If you want to email me your work, maybe Katie, you can put my email in the chat. I'd love to see more of these, and maybe I can download the chat later. But so I want to move now from Dickinson. I think all of you who are here probably have firsthand experience of being inspired by Dickinson's work. And she opens up so many possibilities. That sense of paying attention, as I said, both to what's around us, but also to what's within us, both to what we know and to what we don't know, to the questions and to the perhaps answers, right? To what's aligned and to what's slant. And really opening up that sense of possibility of what a poem can be, breaking the rules for us. So, and also always having that honesty, and I think that experience within the body that the poems then translate into language. So what I thought I would do was maybe share some of my poems, share some of Rachel's poems, who of course wanted to be here. Maybe actually I'll start with sharing one of Rachel's poems. This is one of the first poems. I actually heard Rachel read this poem aloud over 20 years ago. And it was one of the first times that I really paid a lot of attention to her poetry. And I think when you read this poem, when you hear this poem, you'll understand why. It's a very much a poem about getting to that space beyond language, that place of pain. And I'm holding her in my thoughts and her family in her thoughts. And I also am thinking about how much in those times of real trial we turn to poetry, right? The poet Audre Lorde says, poetry is not a luxury. That's right. When we don't know, when we're searching for meaning in challenging times, poetry is there for us, and Dickinson's poetry is such a great place to turn to. Anyway, so I want to share one of Rachel's poems. And I'll let you read along with me because it can be hard to understand as you're just hearing a poem for the first time. So I put together this document, and we can share it in the chat, and you can download it. But for now, just stay looking, with the screen share. But it has a lot of resources on it that you can have beyond this session. So, so this is a poem about giving birth and about kind of coming to the limits of one's own body. Either all, I, or none, no matter is. Wants to, but peels each sanity, go through, women say, circle of fire. And though fear a pure thing is not acceptance. I swear I say I have no hold, myself captive, someone, this is, she says, crescendo. The syringe then, as if disco or strobe it, my God, muzzle, inside molten, a clear view, no overpass, this monumental, this, crowning, but would not move. Circle of fire, they say, something, the room. Her hand strongly on the side rail. Listen, listen to me, she says, listen. The midwives call it crescendo, without it impossible, but how I presses into template, please, the want to wish to is not easy to shake off. Now this second son I never dreamed fills something unasked. See how his eye on me, even shut, my breathing measured, meted, and I want but cannot start out, only to end up day and night go by without that room bend up and down, hands, knees, what I lost there, what I got, and to ask if I am happy is here, happy is no part of love. So that attempt to translate into language those extreme experiences. And I saw some of you in the chat talking about how I felt a funeral in my brain has been interpreted in so many different ways, perhaps like a migraine, perhaps epilepsy, perhaps flashbacks from trauma, right? There's so many ways, but it's a kind of physical experience of being up at the limit where reason, logic, our ordinary experience kind of falls through. And I think that's what Rachel is doing so much in her poem. I'll share it again. And she's breaking language, she's breaking the rules, and you have that space on the page where that white space, right? That's holding what really can't be said, the playing with punctuation. So much of this we get to do because Dickinson was there kind of opening up some doors for us. So I wanted to also read a poem of mine, very different, but a different kind of energy. And I'll maybe say a little bit about my own poetry. I have two books. My first book was much, much more about trying to give name to the nameless and trying to make almost geometric shapes that would stand in for what can't be said. So maybe I'll read a poem or two of those. Those tend to be shorter, more contained, more traditionally, I think, Emily Dickinson inspired. And then few poems from my more recent book, which expand but are still working from that sense of spiritual questioning and coming out of listening to the silence. Okay. So this is from my book, The High Shelf. Namelessness. In the box I put the body. There were no words for what had happened. Outside all the other boxes. In some, no movement at all. In some, dancing. The color, like a deep blue lake, reflecting the color of sky. Who could say which was original, which the interior, which the exterior? Or like the color of the sky at dusk opposite the setting sun. All silver, and the lake beneath all silver, as if something were about to happen, or had only just occurred. So that poem is really about trying to give language to those spaces in which language falls off, and trying to give images to that kind of sense of reflection, that kind of half rhyme telling it slant through the images themselves. The way something kind of mirrors something but doesn't quite capture it, or maybe that's how we only know something, through a kind of mirroring. Here's another poem from that first book. Speaking of mirrors, again. The World's Mirror. Nearby long, cold days, sky like water, earth like trees, yellow berries the bear walks by, deer still uninjured, still unafraid. The mind imagines itself gone, steps back, comes closer. There, up high, one last leaf, moving, as if of its own. And so I think this poem was, again, about trying to find an image to describe a kind of internal feeling, like that certain slant of light. That time of year that we're about to get to here in New England, where we're just tipping into winter. And we see the kind of leaves falling and that kind of emptiness emerging, from which we also kind of recognize parts of ourselves. I'll read a few more poems. These are from my more recent book, I Say the Sky, and I would say that my own poetics have kind of opened, and I think of my poems, the images becoming more accessible, the spaces becoming a little more expansive, the language becoming a little bit more direct, but I'm still trying to translate those spaces of silence. Actually, maybe I'll just stop the share for a moment. Those spaces of silence in a poem. And I think that what we saw in Dickinson's poem and what we're seeing in these other poems, and we'll look at some poems by other people as well, is that there are different kind of tenors to silence. There can be a silence that's very peaceful, and there can be a silence that's very fraught, a silence imposed from the outside, right? And so to think about how do you express and how different forms of places and silences and connections that aren't normally given language. Okay, I was going to share my screen again and share a few more poems and then give you some more time to write. I think, so this is the first line is also the title, or the title is also the first line. I think it is such a beautiful dawn, and my mind, which wants to hold things as they are, cannot hold this morning, 1st of April, spring too early this year by 3 weeks, the daffodils of my city spurred forward by the warmth, cannot hold Brett gone, Patrizia gone, not the marching clouds, not the sky that is perched unaltering above the clouds, not the methane leaks, not the whales suffering the piercing sounds of boats. I reach out my hands, one and then the other, spread my fingers as light falls through them. Maybe I'll read two more poems and then give you some more time to write. And then we'll look at a few other poets who are inspired by Dickinson, and I think working out of this tradition of attention and spiritual connection, often from that place of what can't be said in traditional prose. So this poem is Rage. Like all the stars, like the dark that is again and again pierced, like the silence that will not close, like the flames that keep you away with their heat, all you could not say, billowing in that conflagration. No, like the flames that drew you in, that opened their mouths to lick, to bite, to chew all the molecules and transform matter itself into smoke, what can't be touched. So again, trying to give an image to what really doesn't have an image. Like, how do you touch rage? Is it something that's moving, you away from the fire? Is it moving you towards the fire? How do you find those external images for things that, again, are intangible? Or, and I'm going to move through some of them, how can you find the thing that's tangible, but allow it to express something more than itself because it's connected to other things? So this is a short poem called Onion. Wrapped in your own paper-thin gold, your roots shoot earthward, your top stretches to the sun, bulb, full as birdsong. And maybe I'll just read one more and then give you a prompt. And this poem, again, comes to a final image. And that shortest day of the year is both when the days are, the nights are longest. It's maybe that moment of despair, but also just around the corner, the light's about to get longer. On the shortest day of the year, even if there is only the smallest door made of stone with no handle, bend low, put all your weight into it. It opens onto the wide expanse of where you've never been, groundless, blue, and untranslatable. And there, just at the edge of your vision, a single purple flower rooting down. So I didn't in my Dickinson poems have her wonderful poem of walking down the walk and seeing the bird. I'm sure many of you know that poem. I think that Dickinson's poems remind us to pay that close attention. And in the shortest day of the year, it's paradoxically, you need to put all your weight into this tiny little door to get through it, like the eye of the needle that the camel gets through, right? To enter into the impossible land where there is still that little flower rooting down, which opens up to the wide expanses. So I'm going to lead you in another short meditation and prompt and writing time. Come back to your own body. And someone said in the chat, put a little smile on your face. I invite you now to do a visualization, a meditation with a visualization. Think of some particular object that brings you pleasure. It could be a flower, it could be something that you eat, it could be something that you hold in your hand, something tangible that brings you some pleasure. And while your eyes are closed and you're meditating, I invite you to feel that object, to smell the object, to imagine tasting it, listening to it. Be in an encounter, just you and that object, in your own imagination, your memory. And my invitation to you is to give space to that object and to give a voice to it and write a poem either addressed to that object or in the voice of that object. Or it could be a dialogue between the two of you. And see what wants to emerge, right? This object that really doesn't have a voice, the silence of that object, but let it come to life on the page. And we'll be here for a few minutes together. As you're writing, try to use different senses. What is this thing that doesn't normally have a voice? What does it want to express? We'll take one more minute here and come back together. So in the packet I put together, I have poems by Gary Snyder, Eleni Siklianos, Jane Hirschfield, Lucille Clifton. I'm aware of the time, and I was imagining that I'd have time to read them all and talk about them. And I think maybe a better use of the time would be to like look at what you've written and open it up to some more of your questions, and then just to give you that packet so that you can look at those poems. But I would say look at the ways in which these poets break form, um, write out of silence, give language to what isn't normally expressed, um, and create kind of new their own. Each poet is doing their own thing, but I think we can see Emily Dickinson's influence both through her kind of permission to break the walls, but also through her attention to building a spirituality in the poem itself outside of kind of traditional structures or dogma. So I would love to open to your, well, maybe read some of your poems aloud, or at least parts of them, and then open to your questions. I see there are a few questions in the chat. And maybe, let me just read some of these aloud. Karen wrote, the twist at the end, so shapely, the gap in the middle reveals all the seas you move through. I can hear the wine, I can hear the wind, top broken like a fragment of an ancient statue, the frozen web like a piece of coral reef, evidence of scouring. Your absent middle offers a handle, as if you are a shield. You're all the shells I have ever touched and held. Ooh, I love the way we discover what it is, the twist at the end. It's almost like a story with a twist, but then the shell itself, this tangible thing, tells a story, but it's a home. It's now shallow, but it's had this life inside of it. So there are all these layers there. The stones are singing yet again, the chorus calling me to join, to gather up the rock so hard that caught my gaze as I walked by. Oh, little stone, so hard and sharp, so much like me, so like you. I hold you in my hand, you warm. Is that your heart, perhaps, I feel? How many ages have you waited? Were you a mountain, boulder? I too am broken from the past, a beating heart inside a stone. What a story there. The past that comes through without needing to be named, right? Um, is that your heart, perhaps, I feel? The way in which we can communicate with images, and tell stories, even if the whole story isn't there, right? What the shell holds, the past that was broken off that mountain in the stone. So you should be able to download the packet. And I don't know, Anna, if you have people's emails, if it's possible to email them the packet if they signed up. I'm not sure, but Katie's saying how people can download this. Also, maybe, Katie or Anna, you could put my email into the chat. So if anyone feels, you can also find me at nadiacolburn.com. Just Google my name, and you can reach out to me if you have any questions at all. I would love to hear more about what you wrote. I also want to tell you about some upcoming opportunities that I have that you might be interested in. I have a completely free 5-day meditation and writing challenge where each day I send you a 15-minute recording, and that has a short meditation, and then I read a poem and I offer a prompt with words that you can play with, and then give you supported time to write. This is a really fun way to bring together that silence and the voice and to generate 5 new poems in 5 days. Or you can use the recordings again and continue to work with them, continue to generate new poems. So that's completely free, and I think Katie's putting in that link. It's also in the document that I have, and you can find that on my website. I also happen to be starting a poetry class. Enrollment officially closes tomorrow. It's called The Poetry of Attention, and we look really carefully at work by 6 poets, including Emily Dickinson. So it's Emily Dickinson, Whitman, Rumi, Mary Oliver, Lucille Clifton, and Ross Gay. And we learn from their poems, techniques, strategies, forms of attention, and then we write our own poems. It also has meditation. It has some yoga, so you can write from your body. It has a beautiful community. And the class, all the material is housed online, so it's asynchronous. And you get lifetime access to all the teachings, but we go through the class together over 10 weeks this fall, with live sessions for questions and answer and a private community group where you can share work and connect with other community members. So that officially closes for enrollment tomorrow. But if you're here, I don't want to put so much pressure on you. I will keep it open for you until Monday if you're interested in that. You can see more about it. You can email me any questions about it. If you just email me and tell me, hey, I was at the Dickinson event, can you send me the links and keep it open for me? I will just send those to you. It costs $497. This is a great deal because you get that lifetime access, that community, all the teachings with so many different prompts, and it has a whole revision module as well, which has lots of tips about revision. Anyway, I'll keep that open for you until Monday. Just send me an email if you want me to open that back up for you, but or jump on now while it's still open to the public. I know that Anna has some things that you want to say. I also see a few questions in the chat, so just very quickly to answer them. The singing bowl and cultural appropriation. I study with, I'm practice with the Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, and he really teaches everyone to use the singing bowl, and also really encourages people around the world to practice these in this tradition, whatever your cultural background is. So with all due respect, this is something that the singing bowl has really been helpful for me in reminding me to come back to my own center. So I like to share that with other people. Dawn, you asked, what do I mean as new forms of attention? I guess maybe I mean both that attention to what's around and what's within us, and new strategies for putting that on the page. But I hope that maybe this class will have opened up some of those ideas for you. And Raghav, you asked, could I explain off-rhyme? So off-rhyme is when you have 2 words like hello, jello. They sound pretty much exactly the same. But hello, hello and willow. Maybe that's not even quite great. Hello and someone give me a hello and Jollof. Yes, that would be hello and hero. Those could be off rhymes, right? Or hello and hallelujah. right? Like they sound similar, but they're not exactly the same at the end. Those are off rhymes. And so they're kind of slant. They're you hear both the similarity and the difference at the same time. Um, are there other questions? I would love to answer your questions. I would love to stay connected to you. And I also want to make sure that Anna has time to tell you more about what's happening with this amazing Emily Dickinson week. I also want to remind you, check out Rachel's work, and check out all the other people's work in the packet. Maybe Katie, you can share the link to the packet as well, and just to some of those free resources and the poetry class if anyone wants that. Doesn't look like there are any other questions. Well, really such a pleasure to be with you all. Such an honor to have some little tribute to Emily Dickinson and be part of this amazing festival.
Thank you so much, Nadia.
Thank
Wow,
you.
yeah, this has just been a really thought-provoking evening of taking in poetry, and I definitely think planting some new seeds of poetry as well. I think we've all journeyed deeper into our own experiences as well as Dickinson's, and I just hope this continues to fuel all of your imaginations, and it's definitely giving meaning to my own observations as we continue our week. And thank you all to those of you who've joined us on live for this event around the world. It's been really inspiring to be with you. As this is Wednesday, also, I will remind you that we have 4 more days of the Tell It Slant Poetry Festival, bringing you the Emily Dickinson Poetry Marathon, workshops, poetry readings, theater, and more. And tomorrow night, we'll be back with the special festival edition of Phosphorescence Poetry Reading, featuring Molly Aiken, Diane Seuss, and Jane Huffman. And of course, the festival wouldn't exist without you, our friends and supporters around the world. So if you haven't had a chance to make a donation yet, I'll also put the link in the chat for you now to do that. Thank you all so much, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Have a good night.